What if the most powerful figure in Christian history wasn't a pope, a prophet, or even a man? What if, hidden in the highlands of Ethiopia, there exists a book so dangerous, so theologically explosive, that the Vatican never dared to speak its name? A book that says Mary, the mother of Jesus, didn't just give birth to the Messiah. She commanded angels, spoke to apostles, and rescued souls from eternal damnation even when God Himself said no. This isn't fiction. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is a real book, written in the ancient Ge'ez language, preserved for over 1,000 years in stone monasteries clinging to Ethiopian mountainsides. A book that's never been approved by Rome, but never silenced by Ethiopia. In the West, Mary is often painted as silent, obedient, pale, background. But in the Ethiopian tradition, she is a queen, a warrior, the Ark of the Covenant in flesh, the Mother of Light, a living force of divine compassion and cosmic justice. These stories give Mary a timeless presence, as if she continues to guide the faithful long after the events of the Gospels. But if these writings are so powerful, so full of grace and hope, why does the Vatican want them forgotten? That's what we're going to uncover today, because deep inside Ethiopia's lost Book of Mary is a miracle so shocking, so radical, that even modern theologians don't know what to do with it. Stay with us until Part 6, where we reveal the one story that changed how millions of Ethiopians saw heaven and how one woman overturned divine judgment itself. Before we begin, leave a comment below. Should the Church embrace Ethiopia's version of Mary? Like this video if forgotten truths matter to you, and subscribe for more stories that history tried to bury, until now.
What if a scroll existed, a sacred scroll, hidden for over 1,000 years in the mountains of Ethiopia? And what if that scroll told a story about Mary the world was never supposed to hear? Not the quiet, gentle Mary we see in European paintings, not the obedient virgin tucked into the background of nativity scenes, but a cosmic force, a woman of divine fire who speaks, commands, and defies even the decrees of heaven. That's exactly what the Ethiopian Book of Mary, called the Godla Mariam, or the Miracles of Mary, proclaims. And that's exactly why the Vatican never canonized it. This isn't a lost gospel like those found in a desert cave or pieced together from fragments. This is a living manuscript, handwritten in the sacred Ge'ez language, sung by priests and preserved in stone monasteries for centuries. It was never buried, just never invited into the Western canon. For Ethiopians, Mary is not simply a vessel of Christ, but the Ark of the Covenant in flesh, the dwelling place of divine wisdom. In this sacred text, Mary does more than weep or pray. She intervenes. She saves. She appears in visions to kings, shields monasteries from invading armies, and performs miracles long after her death. She is timeless, and she is terrifying to those who fear a woman's power. One of the most controversial stories from the Book of Mary tells of a monk condemned to hell. But Mary appears before Christ Himself and pleads for the soul's release. She doesn't ask, she insists. And in this tale, Christ relents. To Western theology, this is dangerous ground. It threatens the hierarchy. It questions whether Mary's mercy can override divine judgment itself. To Ethiopia, it's not heresy, it's holiness. And this contrast between fear and faith is where the story turns. When Catholic missionaries entered Ethiopia in the 16th century, they were stunned by what they found. They had expected primitive devotion. Instead, they found a rich theological tradition where Mary was not a figurehead, but a queen. And when they discovered the Book of Mary, they didn't celebrate it. They tried to suppress it. Because for the Vatican, these writings didn't just rewrite Mary. They rebalanced power away from Rome, away from men, and toward an African woman enshrined in divine authority. So the book was left outside the official canon. Never declared false, never affirmed true, just forgotten by design. But Ethiopia never forgot. In monasteries like Debre Libanos and Lalibela, the scrolls were copied by hand, preserved through invasions, colonialism, even attempted censorship. Each word passed from monk to monk like sacred fire, not because it was history, because it was still alive. These stories give Mary a timeless presence, as if she continues to guide the faithful long after the events of the Gospels. And so we ask, if this book is real, if it contains visions, teachings, and miracles the West has never accepted, what else might be hidden in Ethiopia's vault of sacred memory? That's what we'll uncover next, because before Rome ever crowned its first pope, Ethiopia had already embraced Christianity on its own terms.
Long before the Vatican raised its marble domes, before popes wore crowns or councils declared doctrine, a Christian kingdom had already risen, not in Europe, but in Africa. Not beneath the shadow of Rome, but under the golden sun of Ethiopia. Ask most people where Christianity began, and they'll point to Jerusalem or Rome. But few know that one of the oldest Christian nations on earth is Ethiopia. And it didn't inherit faith from the West. It kindled its own flame. By the 4th century, while Europe was still grappling with persecution and empire, the kingdom of Axum, one of Africa's greatest civilizations, declared Christianity its official religion. King Azana, guided by the teachings of a Syrian missionary named Frumentius, embraced the faith with conviction, not by the sword, not by conquest, but by a revelation. Ethiopia didn't wait for Rome's approval. It didn't attend the Council of Nicaea in 325. It didn't debate the dual natures of Christ at Chalcedon, and it didn't accept the decrees of Trent centuries later. Christianity came to Ethiopia not as an extension of Rome, but as an independent flame. This independence is not just political, it's theological. Because Ethiopia preserved something the West often lost: the voices that didn't make the cut. While the Western Church was narrowing the canon, choosing what to keep and what to burn, Ethiopia kept its arms wide open. It preserved entire books the West would later call Apocrypha: the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Ascension of Isaiah, and yes, the Book of Mary's Miracles. But in Ethiopia, these were not second-class scriptures. They were scripture, read aloud, chanted in monasteries, woven into prayers and liturgies, lived. It's easy to forget that the Bible as we know it didn't fall from the sky. It was chosen by men, through councils, by vote. Ethiopia chose differently. And because of that choice, we have access to stories the Western Church never told. Stories of angels falling from heaven, of visions that stretch into eternity, and of Mary not as a quiet figure, but as a queen who acts across centuries. So when the Vatican looks at Ethiopia's Christian tradition, it sees something both ancient and uncontrollable. A church that never bowed to Roman structure, a theology that never asked permission, a memory that can't be erased. Its connections were not with the Latin bishops of the West, but with the Coptic Christians of Alexandria and the Syriac traditions of the East. This means Ethiopia's Christianity grew on its own terms, nourished by its own soil, and guided by a vision of God that was African, mystical, and unfiltered. It also means that Ethiopia never had to edit its theology to fit European kings or Western empires. And so while the West erased voices that felt too feminine, too radical, too miraculous, Ethiopia kept them, all of them. But this raises a question no historian, no bishop, and no believer can ignore. If Ethiopia's Christianity was never filtered through Rome, then what other gospels, revelations, or truths might it still be holding?
What if Mary never left? What if the mother of Jesus didn't vanish after Pentecost, but instead continued appearing across centuries, guiding kings, warning monks, and defeating evil? In the Western imagination, Mary's story ends quietly. She gives birth, offers comfort at the cross, and fades into the footnotes of history. Silent, obedient, holy, but passive. But in Ethiopia, Mary never disappears. She lives, she speaks, she acts with power, purpose, and divine urgency. In the sacred Ethiopian manuscripts, especially the Godly Mariam, the book of Mary's miracles, Mary is not just remembered, she is present, appearing in visions, performing miracles, interceding for the living and the dead. These stories give Mary a timeless presence, as if she continues to guide the faithful long after the events of the Gospels. One story tells of a monastery besieged by foreign invaders. The monks cry out, and as swords draw near, Mary appears, wrapped in golden light, casting blindness upon the soldiers until the monastery is saved. Another tale recounts a poor farmer who prays to her during a drought. That night, he dreams of her pouring water from her hands onto his fields. When he wakes, rain falls for the first time in months. This is not mythology. This is living liturgy. In the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Mary is not just a historical relic. She is the Mother of Light. She is the second Zion. She is the Ark of the Covenant in flesh, not carrying tablets of stone, but the Word made flesh within her body. She doesn't wait for permission, she commands, she acts. And the faithful do not simply venerate her, they rely on her. In Ethiopian homes and churches, her name is whispered daily. Children are named after her. Feasts are held in her honor. Priests chant ancient hymns calling her Kedist Mariam, Holy Mary, the intercessor, the protector, the queen. And visually, she is nothing like the Mary seen in European paintings. She is dark-skinned, regal, draped in Aksumite royal robes. She wears gold jewelry not as ornament, but as birthright. While European iconography presents Mary in pale Romanized forms, Ethiopian manuscripts depict her as a dark-skinned queen. She is not fragile, she is not background, she is front and center, a force of divine mercy with the authority to act. This challenges more than just artistic tradition. It challenges the very structure of Western theology, which has long hesitated to place a woman, especially an African woman, at the center of cosmic power. But Ethiopia never hesitated. To them, Mary is not simply the mother of Christ. She is the cosmic advocate, the unshakable queen who fights for souls even when judgment says otherwise. And so we ask, if Mary still acts, if she still speaks, if her voice echoes through Ethiopia's mountains and manuscripts,
Why did the Western Church try so hard to silence her? They came with crosses in one hand and fire in the other. When the Portuguese missionaries arrived in Ethiopia in the 1500s, they didn't just bring the gospel. They brought Rome's version of it. And what they found shocked them. Not because Ethiopia lacked faith, but because it had too much, and it wasn't under their control. The Jesuit envoys expected to find a primitive Christianity, isolated, perhaps in error, waiting for correction. Instead, they found scrolls written in Ge'ez, sacred chants echoing in mountaintop monasteries, and a people whose devotion to Mary was unlike anything they had ever seen. They found a Mary who appeared in dreams, who stood at the gates of hell to plead for souls, who defied even the judgment of Christ himself. And to the Western mind, this was not beautiful, it was dangerous. Reports from Jesuit envoys reveal their concern that the Ethiopian devotion to Mary undermined papal authority and distorted what they considered the true faith. So the missionaries did what empire always does when it feels threatened. They tried to erase what they could not understand. They attempted to suppress the Ethiopian Marian texts, to rewrite the liturgy, and to fold Ethiopia's fierce spiritual independence into the authority of the Pope. But Ethiopia did not bow. The scrolls were hidden, copied in secret, passed from monk to monk like sacred contraband. Some were buried beneath church altars, others smuggled into desert caves, guarded not just by hands, but by hearts willing to die rather than see them lost. And when the Jesuits were eventually expelled, the fire they brought failed to consume the sacred memory of a people. The book survived, passed hand to hand by scribes who saw themselves as guardians of a holy legacy. It wasn't just resistance, it was reverence, an act of spiritual preservation in the face of theological colonization. Because Ethiopia knew this wasn't just about doctrine, it was about identity. And the scrolls, especially the Book of Mary, were part of Ethiopia's soul. Each word written in Ge'ez carried more than ink. It carried defiance. It carried memory. It carried the voice of a mother who would not be silenced. In a modern world where ancient texts are digitized, commodified, and debated, these scrolls remind us that some knowledge was never meant to be debated. It was meant to be defended. And so we ask, if the Vatican tried to rewrite Ethiopia's theology 500 years ago, and the people refused, what might those hidden scrolls still contain? Words yet untranslated, visions still unread, waiting to speak again.
Why is Mary always white in Western art? Even in Egypt, even in Bethlehem, even in Nazareth, where the sun scorches the earth, she remains porcelain-skinned, dressed in Roman robes, hands folded, eyes downcast. But in Ethiopia, Mary is dark-skinned. She wears golden Aksumite regalia, not borrowed Greco-Roman fabric. She stands tall. She commands. She's not a figure of pity. She's a queen of power. This contrast is more than artistic. It's theological. Europe sculpted Mary into something safe, a symbol of quiet obedience, a perfect woman by the standards of empire. Holy, yes, but never threatening. But in Ethiopia, Mary is a living force, both maternal and militant. She challenges demons, she rebukes injustice, she shields the faithful like a lioness shields her cubs. In Ethiopian hymns, she is invoked as the mother of light and the second Zion, and her image reflects that sacred authority. Manuscripts from Lalibela and Axum portray her not in pale blue and silver, but in deep reds, royal purples, and gold. Her hair is braided like a queen. Her face is strong, not soft. She doesn't ask for mercy, she delivers it.
This isn't just about skin tone, it's about spiritual identity. Because in Europe, Mary often represents unattainable purity, an ideal to admire from a distance. But in Ethiopia, Mary is flesh and blood. She's part of the people, rooted in the land, a reminder that divine power can wear brown skin and walk barefoot on African soil. This African Marian identity confronts the Eurocentric lens that dominated Catholic tradition for centuries. And that confrontation is uncomfortable. It raises questions the Western Church has long avoided. Why does whiteness so often define holiness in religious art? Why is obedience praised, but authority punished when it comes from women, and especially from Black women? Ethiopia never erased Mary's power to fit a political structure. It embraced her as she is, active, prophetic, sovereign. In a world still grappling with racial identity and gender roles, Ethiopia's Mary offers something radical, a divine woman of color who doesn't just witness miracles, she causes them. And the West has never fully known what to do with her, because when a woman like Mary holds too much power, she can't be painted into a corner, she can't be edited out of Scripture, and she certainly can't be ignored. So we ask, if the real Mary is a queen, a warrior, a woman whose skin and soul reflect the soil of Africa, what else might the Western Church have hidden beneath paint and silence?
What if Mary could save you, even when God says no? What if the final word of judgment, the eternal sentence of a soul, could be overturned by a mother's plea? There's a story buried in the Ethiopian scrolls, a story the Western Church would never dare preach from its pulpits, a story so bold, so loving, so theologically dangerous, it was called heresy in the West and holiness in Ethiopia. It comes from the Gadla Mariam, the Book of Mary's Miracles. A humble monk dies with unconfessed sins. His soul is seized by demons, dragged to the edge of damnation. The gates of hell open. But just before he is cast in, Mary appears, clothed in light, surrounded by silence, with eyes that see through eternity. She steps into the divine court. She interrupts the judgment. Christ speaks. This soul has not repented. The law is clear. But Mary speaks back. Then let mercy be clearer. She pleads not as a subject, but as a mother, not just to Christ the judge, but to Christ her son. And in that moment, he relents. The monk is released, hell's gates close, and Mary returns, not triumphant, but tender, because her greatest victory is not power, it's compassion. This radical vision of divine compassion flowing through Mary unsettles the harsher doctrines of Western theology. To the Western canon, this miracle is unacceptable because if Mary can overrule divine judgment, where does papal authority stand? Where do councils, bishops, and theology fit into a world where mercy wins? To Ethiopia, this isn't a contradiction. It's the fulfillment of God's heart. Because justice without mercy is not holy, and Mary, above all, is the embodiment of divine mercy, wrapped in human form. This miracle is not just about one monk. It's about all of us, about every soul that has wandered, every person who fears they are beyond forgiveness. In the Ethiopian church, this story is not whispered with embarrassment. It is chanted in liturgies, painted in manuscripts, sung by children who believe their mother in heaven hears them even when no one else does. She is a cosmic advocate whose power of intercession exceeds even the finality of divine judgment. And maybe that's the miracle the modern world needs most. Not more punishment, but more mercy. Not more hierarchy, but more compassion. Not silence, but the voice of a mother who speaks when everyone else stays quiet. So we ask,
In a world still wrestling with shame, judgment, and fear, what might happen if we let Mary speak again? If we opened the scrolls, if we remembered the Queen of Light, if we let the woman who raised the Savior raise us too?